confabulation, hallucination. Your judgment matters even more than it did before.
Dr. Jonathan Chen is a clinician and AI researcher who's making medicine smarter by turning real-world data into tools that actually work at the bedside.
When I first saw a preview version of GPT-4 as things were building up, I was like, holy smokes. I literally felt like I need to throw away half of my research program.
When he's not advancing the future of clinical decision-making, he's an accomplished magician, so he knows a thing or two about making the impossible feel possible.
I'm using magic, again, as that algorithm. Boy, does that look real, but you still have to have that judgment to tell the difference.
In our interview, he dives into how AI can support rather than replace human judgment.
AI could be the best teacher you have ever had, but if you misuse it, you miss the point.
And shares what he's learning from bringing these systems into real clinical practice. Welcome to Stanford Department of Medicine's Inside Look at the Future of Medicine.
Well, Jonathan, welcome to the future of medicine. You just came from our grand rounds, being a speaker to a packed house, presenting not just cutting-edge ideas in AI and a lot of your own work, but magic. So let us start there. Medicine or magic? Which came first? How did you get there? How did you arrive at today as a faculty member here at Stanford who practices both?
Who would be crazy enough to try all of the above? I don't know, I played a little bit of magic when I was a 12-year-old boy, as many 12-year-old boys do. And then after a few months, I stopped doing it because I had nobody to perform for. My sister wasn't going to watch it more than one time, right? I just gave it up.
These were card tricks? Or like?
I learned a 3-card Monty. I learned there's some trick decks. I actually learned a few basic things, but actually probably nothing you'd be impressed by. Just kind of kid stuff. And then I became a doctor somewhat more because my parents wanted me. There's a little bit of story of that as well.
Well, tell us.
And I started college unusually young. I was 13 years old when I started college. And I don't know about you. When I was 13, I did not know what I wanted to be when I grew up. If you had asked me when I was a kid, I would have said I wanted to be a stand-up comedian because I like to make people laugh, and that felt good. I never said I want to be a doctor or be a scientist or something like that.
But how did you end up at college at 13?
So there's a program in Los Angeles at Cal State LA. It actually started, I think, out of their psychology department, like an experiment, basically. They studied precocious kids in junior high, and do you want to basically be in this program? And it just perpetuated. I took a test. They said, you did okay. Why don't you come in for a summer quarter? And now there's a whole program. If you do okay, not just academically, but kind of emotional readiness, you could just start college full time through that program.
This is okay, but you did okay among the people who are being considered for college at age 13.
Right, yes.
So the scale is a little different.
You got it. Not that I don't know if it's anything extreme, but that kind of dynamic along the way. But that was also very important and powerful because it's not like it was just me amongst a giant college campus. It was me and like 30-ish other kids, essentially. So now I had a cohort to hang out with. A couple years after that, I transferred to UCLA. That really was tough. That was tough because now I'm a 15-year-old kid living on a gigantic college campus by myself, living in the dorms. That was very challenging, but kind of forced me to grow up real fast. It's not enough just to study anymore. I can study and ace all the exams, and that's just not enough anymore. You have to figure out life real quick.
For a 15-year-old, that's a challenge. So then you graduated.
I graduated from UCLA, and I was all the pre-med clubs. I took the MCAT, and because.
But you were 16 or something when you.
I was a little older than that. I was a ripe 19 by the time. By the time I was out of there. But then, kind of at the last minute, I hear all this stuff like, "Well, you're going to be a doctor. You got to have like a passion for healing. It's got to be like your life's mission." And I'm like. I'm like 18, 19 years old. I feel nothing, okay? I'm a kid, basically. I'm not ready to commit my life to this. I need to go have some other experiences. And my real underlying nerd passion, I'm just a nerd, right? I just like to study. I like to learn things. And I'm a computer nerd, right? I like to program. I'm very good at it. So I actually worked as a software engineer, software development, nothing to do with biology or medicine for a couple of years. The dot-com bubble and burst back in that era.
And what were you programming back then? What kind of a computer were you using? And what language were you programming?
I mean, I was learning C++ in class, but most of industry at the time was Java programming at the time. And then the internet, which has become a thing, making 3-tiered applications, HTML, JavaScript, Java at the time. Now it would seem antiquated. It's just kind of things have evolved. But that gave me a lot of perspective on industry. It's like, oh, wow, suddenly when I can make 6 figures as a 19-year-old, my mom didn't care that much when I went to medical school.
College, medical school, earning money.
But then after a year of that, and then the company laid off a third of the company and during the dot-com bubble burst, including myself. And I got another job. It was fine. But then it gave me a more perspective. I'm like, well, this is a good job, and I'm good at it. But I could foresee, I'm not sure I'm going to find a rewarding long-term career I'm going to be happy with if I'm still doing this for 10 years.
Were you from a technical or academic or medical family?
Really not. That's why I'm sort of the mom's aspiration to be the first doctor in the family kind of situation. My dad was an electrical engineer with a computer science master's, so that's where I get a lot of that kind of nerdiness from.
Yeah.
But this combination was very weird. Then my old friend said, why don't you consider medical school again? I'm like, what? Oh, I left that all behind. I'm not going to go back. I have to go back and go beg my old professors for a letter of recommendation after I left. Oh, no, forget it. It was my girlfriend at the time. She said, oh, no, Jonathan, you should totally apply for med school. You should do it because in life you will regret what you didn't try, not what you did try.
Right. Oh, interesting.
Once I heard that,
putting the guilt trip on
I was like, it's like just twisting the knife. Oh my gosh, well, now I have to. But I said, I'm going to apply for MD, PhD programs only, and the PhD has to be in computer science. And I think that does sound crazy, but that's the point. If I'm going to do it, it has to be crazy enough to be something different. Otherwise, I might as well just stay in my job. I could have lived a much easier, more comfortable life if I had done that.
Right. So MD, PhD with computer science.
Yes.
A fair number of places do that, but not that many.
Not many. Not many.
Yeah.
I give credit to University of California, Irvine. They were very open-minded to that School of Computer Science, and they actually literally had another MSTP student, medical scientist training program student, a couple years ahead of me, who was doing that same combo. Right. Versus most places would talk about it, but most places they looked at me strange, like, what?
Yeah.
Shouldn't you be getting it in like biochemistry, immunology, neuroscience? Why would you get a PhD in computer science? That doesn't fit.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciated that they thought that combination meant something, even though at the time I wasn't even sure what it meant.
Yeah.
I think it'll mean something 10, 20 years from now. I don't even know what yet.
And this was in the 90s?
It was about 2000.
2000.
It was just 2001, 2002.
Yeah. So the internet had happened. Like you said, you were programming in the company, internet stuff, Java, JavaScript, whatever. But we were really just maturing in our sense of like I guess the world was sort of understanding what the internet was. We hadn't had the crash had sort of happened just before
it was starting to happen. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So and then you were heading to medical school.
So then I ended up doing the joint degree program, and I thought that'd be compelling. I didn't exactly know how to put the piece together, but I got the PhD in computer science. I like to work on interesting
You
nerd
finished
problems.
the PhD. Is it like the program here?
Joint program.
You finish the PhD pretty much first, and then do clinical. You sort of
it's staggered in the middle. 2 years preclinical, PhD, and then clerkships after that.
And so, what kind of computer science work were you doing during your PhD?
Nowadays, it would actually be called like rules-based expert systems, machine learning applications for chemistry. I was doing actually a lot of organic chemistry. That was my subject domain. And a lesson I did take from my industry experience is like you do need strong technical experience and skills, otherwise it's all just talk, right?
Yeah.
But when you do that, combine that with the deep knowledge of a subject domain, now that's really powerful and unique.
Right.
And now, and skipping ahead, like medicine is really my subject domain that I care a lot about. At the time, I said, well, chemistry, I think that's fun and interesting.
Yeah.
And in so many words, I made AI systems that could do your organic chemistry homework for you.
Okay.
The irony is like, but if it can do your homework for you and help with like pharmaceutical developments, for example, that means it could also teach you how to do your homework. And so not what I expected, but one of the main outputs of my PhD was an education system that was used for over a decade by students around the world to learn organic chemistry.
Interesting. And my daughter is currently doing
suffering through it now
in college. Everybody would want help with that.
Yes.
But I guess we have some other tools that are now helping us.
You got it.
And we'll certainly get to that. So then you did your clinical work, became a doctor.
Which was surprising to many, including myself. I actually did not intend to do residency. I was never intending to be a practicing doctor. I was like, well, I just get the knowledge, but I'll graduate. Maybe I'll do consulting. I'm going to go back. It's so obvious I'm going back to industry in some form or another. Just kind of which industry that's going to be in what format. And then I did my clerkships, like third year, internal medicine rotation. And it surprised me how much I liked it.
Yeah.
I did not expect to like it. I was like, oh man, you're gonna be at the bottom of the totem pole, have sick people complain to you all the time. Oh, who wants to deal with this?
Yeah.
And then I got there, it's like, this is actually really cool. You work in a team, you know you're working on good problems together, it's something that matters, and what you do has very clear impact, and what you do, people are hanging on your work, you gotta do it right. And there's actually a very interesting kind of applied expertise that has to manifest there. It doesn't matter what the abstract says. You can talk in generalities. Either you prescribe the medicine or you don't.
Right.
How do you make that kind of a tough decision? I thought was very compelling. And so then I did decide to do residency, and that's how I first arrived at Stanford. Third time was a charm.
Okay.
Undergrad didn't work out, med school, PhD, but finally internal medicine residency. Very grateful to have a match at Stanford. I've been here since.
Yeah. Yeah, we've been very happy to have you here in the Department of Medicine, part of our newly named Division of Computational Medicine. You have a number of different roles now, but I think it would be great to start, first of all, with just some of the really impactful work that's been covered in the press, kind of around the world, that you've been doing, thinking about the application of modern day architectures of AI to medicine. And in particular, maybe the thing that hit the biggest headline was this idea that when you compared human doctors plus AI tools to the performance of the AI tool alone, it appeared the AI tool outperformed the doctor. So the doctor was pulling down the performance of the AI. But talk about that work and some of the caveats and what it means for us.
Sure, that was definitely not what we expected. But when I first saw a preview version of GPT-4 as things were building up, I was like, holy smokes. I literally felt like I need to throw away half of my research program. This thing has leapfrogged so many things that I thought was capable, and it just has moved much faster than I expected and pivot there. But then empirically, I didn't even bother checking multiple choice questions because I know 100 people can do that. It's so easy to do, and also that's not what we would care about, right? As a doctor, you instantly know that's not what really matters. Not that vignettes are the whole thing that matters, but that would unpack it to another level of depth. So let's say a complex case, reasoning, really expert consensus grading, very hard to do, but that's our educators are the key to unlocking that. And it is not the result we expected. We thought, our hypothesis was, oh, you could look up stuff on UpToDate, PubMed, or you could use this AI tool that seems really smart, and I bet the doctors could be even better. We can show this combination is so great. How cool would that be? And that's not what we found. We found they didn't make that much difference. Very surprising to us, and really made us ask different questions. Oh, technology is amazing, but clearly it is not the answer. I mean, that actually has been true all along.
And these were doctors who were already somewhat familiar with the tool?
So this is the key. At that time we did that study, it was pretty early days. This was 2.5 years ago. And so a third of the doctors had never touched ChatGPT or chatbot before in their life, and the other third maybe used it once or twice. So it was clear a lot of them, they did not know what it was and they did not know how to use it. Or if they did not trust it, right? And I agree. I don't know if you remember the first time you had the chat with the AI chatbot. It felt weird. And you didn't know, what can I ask? What could it say? It was just a very bizarre feeling. If you've never had that experience, it's hard to know how to use it effectively.
Oh, I mean, for decades in computer science, this idea of the Turing test from the 1950s, right? Was and suddenly we were leapfrogged past it almost. It almost became an irrelevance overnight. But for medicine, where I think it's been clearly one of the major applications. I mean, of course, this is affecting our entire world. But I think with the internet, it wasn't immediately obvious that health was one of the most interesting and important applications. I think with the language models that we're seeing now, it really is to the forefront. And certainly it's been changed. We don't see patients anymore who haven't already consulted a language model. The idea 2 years later that there would be a doctor who doesn't anymore know how to use the language model is
absolutely
also would be one that isn't that credible anymore. But what exactly, do you think it was that naivety about just how to use the system, or do you genuinely think the human was dragging down some element of the way the reasoning within the model worked?
Gosh, I talked a little bit in one of our follow-up studies. It stuck in preprint peer review because the peer review process can't keep pace with technology movement. We finished the studies months ago. There is anchoring and sycophancy that happens, right? If you say, hey, AI, I got this patient with a shortness of breath. Do you think it's congestive heart failure? It'll probably just say, sure, good idea, doctor. Congestive heart failure sounds great. When maybe it's not giving you the objective assessment it could have. In fact, we've empirically shown that many times. That.
And why does it just, because not everybody I think who listens to this necessarily has a technical background in the way the architecture of these language models work. I mean, why are the models sycophantic?
Okay, a couple of, at the very base level, I like to call them autocomplete on steroids. It's just read the internet in so many words, and it just can guess the next word, filling in a sentence. But if it just did that, it actually is not very interesting to work with, because it just makes up sentences that sort of make sense, but that's not the question I asked. That's not the question I asked. And so they did supervised fine-tuning, reinforcement of human feedback. What does that mean? It'll output 10 different answers. Have you noticed that if you ask a chatbot the same question, it gives you 10 different answers? And then humans said, I like this answer better. This is answering my question better. This one I feel is more coherent. And so that's good, so it gives more coherent answers, but that also means humans are instilling their values of what they like. And humans really like it when people agree with them. And when computers agree with them, whether it's right or not, people really like that feeling.
So this leads it then into a particular part of its sort of the space it lives in, where it not only wants to please, but that goes as far as it doesn't separate like the facts that I need to provide as the answer from its sort of sense of wanting to please that is imbued in it by this reinforcement learning feedback cycle. So I think, this is something that you have advised, and again, we'll come to your other education role in a little bit of time, but as we're interacting with these models, it sounds like a very practical piece of advice is to let it operate kind of first, and without giving it some pre-probability of an idea, a bias that you have about what the answer might be.
And for what it's worth, a lot of these concepts, I like to say, it's not really a new concept. Like humans and processes do that too. I don't know if you get an admission from the emergency room, they tell you, hey, this patient has systolic heart failure or exacerbations. Like, it may be, and 80 to 90% that is correct, but sometimes, wait, what? No, this patient has pneumonia. They're totally, we have anchored on the wrong thing.
Although I think sometimes it depends on the source, and maybe we might not want to reveal the level of skepticism we have, but depending on who's on the other end of the goal.
Some sources their pre-test probability of hitting
sometimes
it.
You start with a slightly different
and in a reasonable way. In fact, the other danger with AI is this automation bias. It's like, it's right so often, which it is.
Right.
You eventually waste your time double checking all the time. But that gets you in a bad situation too when it starts to really matter.
I find this with the digital scribe that we have now available in clinic. It is of course so articulate and so well written, and the punctuation is great, and the capital letters in the right place, the commas, it's got em dashes everywhere. It speaks so well that I think our brains, we're used to reading text that is very well written when it has been checked by multiple humans, and so we sort of associate probably at a subconscious level
quality.
And we have to revisit that now.
Absolutely agree. And I think that's, in my prior talks, I emphasize it more, where it's like confabulation solutions. It's photorealistic images, very eloquent prose. Those are no longer reliable indicators of truth anymore. Your judgment matters even more than it did before, and let alone accidental errors. There are bad actors out there who are straight up trying to scam you with things that look very credible. And it's actually kind of a scary world we're emerging into that I actually don't know that we fully know how to cope with it at this point.
Talking of that, you presented also some really interesting data around, many of these models have been tested on benchmarks where there's a kind of right answer and a wrong answer. It's not a multiple choice. It's not very real world. But I think you make the point very well that in the real world, we certainly don't have multiple choice questions. We don't have neatly packaged questions. But we do have a rubric within medicine that we should first do no harm. And so you've been exploring this a little bit.
There's a great, fantastic team here who it's always this classic that the team did the work, and somehow my name's on there too. This started, what we actually are trying to do, our electronic consult system, let's prototype like an AI providing that consult. What would that be like? But hey guys, before we unleash that in like the real world, can we just make sure it's at least safe? Let's get some representative cases and make sure that the thing doesn't give answers that would actually harm somebody, let alone is it even useful at that point. And that's not a trivial question to answer. And in this study, which is just emerging as a preprint out right now, accuracy and harm are not the same thing. It's not. I bet you have a lot of really bright students, residents, trainees, and they're super smart. They know everything, and sometimes like, whoa, that's dangerous. Don't do that. And it's not because they're not smart. It's like, oh, was I not supposed to do that? Was that important? Like, they have no basis to make that distinction. So that required a very deliberate type of evaluation that showed that it was not correlated with accuracy alone.
I often think about the parallels between the world we're now walking down with AI in medicine and the autonomous vehicle world. Now, there's many differences, but there's also very many
good analogies,
similarities. And I was thinking of that as you were presenting the do no harm model. But that as a minimum bar, we have to start with that. And in fact, we probably should subordinate accuracy to do no harm.
I think that actually is kind of like a clinical trial progression. Before you check the efficacy, can we just make sure we're not accidentally killing people? Once you've done that, now let's see like the real efficacy, and we're kind of jumping ahead to some degree. And what's kind of surprising us, but we didn't know until we deliberately tested, for these kind of tough questions, it's not a huge harm, but it's not a trivial amount either. 10 to 20% of the times, even frontier models will sometimes do, and what was really interesting, often the harm was that they didn't do something, they didn't recommend something that was actually important to address.
Yeah, I think that we often miss, because we're so interested in the sort of sins of commission.
Yes.
And it is true that we should pay attention to those,
Yes.
but we often are not very good at accounting for the sins of omission.
And a very tough one for computational analytic data science and work in general, right? We're checking positive predictive about precision. Like, well, if I found it, I know I found it. But what about all the diseases, all the diseases you missed? They were never charted. The whole point, nobody ever wrote them down because they never found them. And I think that's a great reminder lesson. Again, this is not an AI lesson. This is like a life lesson, right? It's a clinical practice lesson that doing nothing doesn't mean doing no harm.
Right. Right.
You can actually do a lot of harm when you should have done something when you saw it.
Another area it'd be great to explore for just a few minutes is what falls under the term RAG, for retrieval augmented generation. You did talk about it briefly in your talk. But we are moving from a world where we have these models essentially as next token predictors, where they're built on this huge mass of data, mass of words, and are trying to please you because of the reinforcement learning, all of that part that we talked about. And there's a certain reliability with that, but it's also, that mode has also been associated with a lot of the fabrication and fabricating references, for example, for medical questions. But as we've moved, and there's great examples, including a company you mentioned called Open Evidence, now to a world where it's much more likely, and the frontier models do this too as well, now, where they're more likely to go to a source and then use their skills in manipulating language to bring back the data directly from that source. So talk a little bit about that evolution that we're sort of all in generally, but specifically for medical AI.
It's a great migration. I used to talk about, oh gosh, confabulation, hallucination. This thing just, it's like has Korsakoff syndrome. It's just making up words, even if it doesn't make any sense. It's not trying to lie to you. It doesn't know what a lie is. It's just filling in the blanks as it goes. I decided not to cover that today because it's not a solved problem, but it's much less of an issue because most of the models have deliberate RAG, retrieval augmented generation, baked in, where it's like, well, you're asking a factual or evidence-specific question, I would go look for that evidence and kind of read a document for you. And that, I think, is a very much more grounded approach. You still can't rely on it perfectly, but what is also nice is you don't just have to guess what it's saying. It's like, oh, let me go double-check that article myself, because it matters. And I think ironically, as clinicians, we're in a very good position to address a lot of these vagaries, right? Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong, sometimes it has a source, sometimes it doesn't. This is very scary for things that matter, but just like in real life, your consultant gives you a lot of advice all the time on the wards, don't they? And most of the time they are right, but sometimes like, wait a minute, it really matters if we go to surgery or not. So this one is worth double checking. Whether we have the antibiotics for 5 or 7 days, you know what, it's probably about the same. I'm not gonna worry too much about it. So you know when it matters, and then you know how to dig in deep when it does.
And I think that is a really important part of this, because as you said, the link is also right there. So you can go directly from a summary from a model that you may or may not believe to some extent directly to the source. And then if you're going to make a medical decision, and I think that's how we mostly use the frontier models at this point. And I think, as you point out, our residents and many of our colleagues tend towards using open evidence, which is a specific language model built really from medical data with doctors' use in mind. Although I think most of our patients and most of the rest of the world tend to use, of course, the frontier models.
I think open evidence requires an NPI number to get into it. They're trying to restrict it, and there's many other players in that space as well.
So they're trying to restrict it to doctors with a provider.
With that in mind, I imagine some of that's for liability purposes, because otherwise it's very obvious all of these models are basically giving medical advice, right? They have this disclaimer, not for medical advice, you cannot use it for any medical purpose, but give me a grade. That's clearly what people are doing. And it creates that very odd tension of who's really responsible for the decisions being made.
We've been obviously very quick and ready to embrace the potential benefits of AI here at Stanford, including in our healthcare system. And you mentioned the engineering team who actually visited with me on rounds in the hospital last week.
That's right.
Which was really fun. But the team for a tool that allows a language model under closed and safe conditions to access actually a single patient's record, and then use these kind of tools we've been talking about, the real strengths, assimilating data, going to get to the sort of raw data and bring back answers. But to do that in the context of a single individual,
it's huge.
And I think for maybe some of the people who listen to the podcast here don't necessarily realize how much time, especially our residents, spend clicking through different screens in our electronic health record. So maybe just talk about that. That seems like a revolution. I mean, it's
I think it is.
But it seems like a revolution. Just talk about the problem, first of all, created by the layers of electronic health records.
Sure.
And the potential solution that this might represent.
For better or worse, so much of our practice, right? You know, Abraham used to as the eye patient. Most of our, do we talk to the patient, or I mostly just type at the computer?
Yeah.
And the electronic medical record, for better or worse, is the central hub for so much of what happens in medicine. And the first time ChatGPT emerged, the first thing I thought is, I want that attached to the medical record.
Yeah.
But for all sorts of privacy, security, engineering reasons, it's actually very difficult to do that. But for a couple of years, teams have been putting together, and now we have that, at least the first forms of it. Very powerful, because I don't know if people realize, we've done this study before, the click studies, like where do trainees, where do doctors spend most time on the computer? It's actually not writing notes.
Yeah.
It's not putting orders. Most of their time is chart review. They're just looking stuff up and trying to reading notes, making sense of it, checking results, and they're collating it. And then at the last minute, then they summarize
and finding it from different places. So in between each piece of information, there might be 5 or 6 clicks.
I literally was reviewing a medical case recently for another reason. They sent me 5,000 pages of documents. And most 4,900 of those pages were worthless, by the way.
Yeah.
But just sifting through that and making sense of it was hours and hours of work, and very common a job we give the medical students for the first year. To why don't you scour those records and summarize what's happening?
I mean, I think we often use our trainees in that because we become really, really good at finding bits of data that are buried in various parts of the chart.
Because that could be the key, and often is the key. It's like, wait, when was that surgery? Did they get the chemo? Or what?
Right.
This is why you consult infectious disease for, to get a really good history.
That is a well-known thing.
Of antibiotics, right?
We need the long form history.
Cultures, antibiotics. Oh, it's when you laid it out, it makes so much sense now.
I mean, we joke about it, but it is actually a serious thing.
A real skill, a real valuable
find
skill.
The infectious diseases note because they know that team will have gone through the past medical history in real detail.
And now, not perfect, not exactly ready for prime time, but it's kind of like the first prototype. You can see where it's going, and it's going to get there. It's very powerful and exciting where it's happening. I would love to see more and more, and I think we will. AI could just do a lot of that, and we can get back to, okay, thank you for the summary and the core facts, so now I can actually think about how to actually approach the patient's case now.
Yeah. There's a few examples of, it's called Chat EHR, is the Stanford version of this. Our residents call it Chatter, which is pretty
not
reasonable.
an accident.
No, but I've had a number of situations where it really has kind of saved me. I was recently presenting a couple of patients at a transplant meeting, and one way or another ended up needing to summarize the case, but having only like 10 minutes to try to collect that. Impossible. You think about that sort of complexity of a patient. And normally, as you said, you go to the infectious disease note, or at least you find the H&Ps, which is the history of physical.
Better
when the patient
chance.
first comes into the hospital, you hope that somebody has summarized the whole past medical history, or at least cut and pasted it from somewhere. In this case, it was not to be found. That patient came from another facility. Nobody had taken the entire medical history, but we knew it was in the electronic record. Now with the Epic Care everywhere,
100 notes, right?
Exactly. And I had 5 minutes. And now this is not an instant thing yet. It does take a few minutes to think and gather, and the longer context you give it, the longer it takes. But it saved my bacon, because it produced a beautiful timeline summary of the patient. That sort of thing, it does very well.
And I would even accentuate that further. It's saved you time, which is good, but also it has the potential, and my wife is a pathologist, she's doing a prototype there. It's like, it caught things that the humans didn't. Has this patient ever had a hematologic malignancy? I don't know. The person who scoured it was like, I don't see it. It's like, no, wait, there was a note from 9 months ago, and it did.
One line.
That totally changes the interpretation now. And so I think it's a very powerful capabilities that we haven't even barely scratched the surface of what a change will make in beneficial ways for practice.
Yeah, and I think that because the deep learning era for AI came first, where we were used to Google Photos showing us, this is your dog, this is your van, that's a truck, that's a frisbee. We were sort of used to the idea that imaging could be something that would come under the spell of AI. But I think now we're seeing that really all of the data.
Yes. Absolutely. That's why when I saw the emerging GPT-3 and GPT-4, like, holy smokes! This actually I think is going to change the world. Versus a lot of stuff. I literally my most cited paper, for better and worse, is that machine learning is way overhyped in medicine. This is a 2-page perspective. This is the most cited thing I have. But here I'm like, okay, there's hype too, and people think AI is magic a little bit too much. It's a marketing buzzword, is what it is. But there are very disruptive capabilities here. I think the internet is the closest analogy. It doesn't mean everyone's going to lose their job, but it affects everything, basically anything does that has to do with reading and writing, which is like everything. Basically.
Yeah. And is that your vision for, let's say, this is something I get asked a lot. I'm sure you get asked it just as much. Like, this is the worst these models are ever going to be.
Right. Right.
Take us, and this all started. I mean, of course, 2017 was the Transformer paper, but really it started with GPT-3, two and a half to 3.
Yes.
And for that, we're talking about 2021, 22.
Yeah.
It's like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So it feels ridiculous for me to ask you about 5 years in the future, but
it's happening 5 weeks from now.
But maybe your paper will be published by then.
I hope so. At least get the first review back.
Yeah, but what do you what do you think just for the next few years?
Oh gosh, that is tough, right? Because 5 years in this kind of epoch. Look at where we were 5 years ago. We weren't even talking about this. We'd still be talking risk prediction models, which is perfectly fine. But I always knew they were limited in their scope here. Within 5 years, this is an easy prediction, right? I'm pretty sure most doctors will be using ambient scribes, or at least that'll be a very common routine technology. It won't even seem novel anymore. It borderline isn't even already. Other predictions for the future, I just filled out a bingo card for this recently. I'm surprised there's not a class action lawsuit against big tech over AI harming people because they got bad medical advice or harmful things.
There are for the creative. The use of text, use of movie, use of actors. There's a lot within Hollywood and then publishing.
Yes.
There's a lot. There are class action lawsuits, but not yet for harm.
For medical harm, I'm really kind of surprised it hasn't happened yet. But more and more, I think it's just going to be embedded in our systems, and it's going to be the kind of thing. It's just like you just forget. It doesn't even seem novel anymore. It's going to be. If your kids will still know a little bit of the difference, right? Like you were there before the internet age, as I was, right? But can your kids comprehend a world without the internet?
No, they cannot.
Maybe they could borderline comprehend the world without a smartphone, but it'll get to the point where it just seems routine. It's in anytime you read or write anything, which is like anytime you interact with a computer, AI is going to be right over your shoulder giving directions, and it'll really abstract the nature of the way we interact with all things.
Yeah. And I think it'll get safer as well. And
I mean, it has to, and I think it should, and it will, but there's a process to get there.
Yeah. So you recently had a new position as Director of AI Education. We're obviously an educational facility. We have School of Medicine, we have medical students, we have PA students, we have a lot of nurses and other trainees. We have residency program fellows. So we're training a whole generation of doctors for the future, as well as providing continuing medical education for some of the doctors of the present.
Something like this, we're all students when like the world changes.
Yeah, but that's not a small job. But I think we have a lot of confidence. We're very proud that from our department perspective that you're the one doing this. How do you even go about planning a curriculum around AI?
Oh gosh, it's chance. So Senior Associate Dean Rena Thomas tapped me for this one. I'm like, here, Rena, you should look for this and this, and Dr. Thomas like, Jonathan, you're not here for advice. You're here to apply for this job. I'm like, okay.
We're not looking for you to recommend someone.
And it's great. I think this is actually a very nice coalescence of so many themes, and it actually isn't crazy for me to do this. If you look at my history, it actually really kind of fits. I wasn't trying to do this, but it makes
your
a ton of
organic
sense.
Chemistry education
I kind of couldn't help it. I have a fortune cookie when I first started my job that you could do well in education. Like, no, I'm trying so hard not to be an educator, but maybe I can't help it here.
But you're here at Stanford and you're a professor, so you're by definition an educator.
And then I realized I kind of can't help. Whenever I talk to a young person, I start teaching something. So I also knew it's not just myself.
I diagnose you as a professor.
Basically, the phenotype is there. And I quickly found a crew. There's many clinical informatics fellows, former and current. So now I have associate directors, Dong Yao, Shivam Vadak, a current fellow, Aiden Zahidavash, and multiple others. I can't name all of them because there's just so many. There's a whole crew that got assembled who education's their passion. And I can give the outline, but really doing curricular design, outlining, reviewing the literature, what the evidence is there, having a framework, not recreating every resource because we don't have to. We can reuse a lot. They've done a great job with that. One of the best ones, actually, I will call Mitra, I think Alakani. She was a first-year student. She gave one of the best things at our first ever AI and Medical Education Symposium this past June. Because her perspective was she's a student. She's just a student. She's not here to do research or science or be a professor. She's just like, hey, these are the 3 tools I figured out and nobody told me. I just tried them myself, and it helps me make flashcards, helps me do practicing interviewing. And I thought that was very compelling. She just showed, I'm a student, this is how I help myself learn in ways that weren't possible before.
And these, so you have a framework, you have a team, which is great. And what are the sort of principles or the things you one, worry most about, and two, sort of want to make sure that you're passing on through the curriculum to medical students and trainees?
Oh gosh, there's some real dilemmas that I don't have easy answers here for. and we have not come to consensus amongst the broader curriculum group at the whole school level. Like, for example, should students be allowed to use AI on their homework? The default answer, and actually at Stanford University, their default answers assume it is disallowed unless your instructor says so.
I see.
And I push like that's hopeless. That cannot be the default policy because it's unenforceable, and it puts students in this very awkward undue temptation scenario where the honor code says I have to follow the rules, but I know all my classmates are doing it, so what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
And so we've shifted towards more, look, homework is just like practice. We're not even going to bother to grade it because it's so easy for AI to do it. It's got to be the closed book exams. But there's some real tensions, and this gets a little dicey. I'm thinking about how much to say on air here, but I think it's real issues we should confront is, you know, some of our medical student classes on the homework for medical reasoning, they're killing it. They're doing great. But when it came to the closed book exams, they did not do very well. Much worse than in prior years. What happened? What happened? It's obvious. They used AI to do their homework, and so they never bothered to actually learn. Oh gosh, guys, no. AI could be the best teacher you have ever had, but if you misuse it, you miss the point. The point of homework isn't to do the homework. It's to make you struggle, and that struggle is actually what makes you learn and make this innate. And the whole education system beyond medicine, just education in general, really got turned upside down in just overnight, that we're still trying to adjust to it, but a human institution cannot move at the pace that technology does.
I think some of it we struggle with. I think we often use the calculator example. We don't force kids to do long division, but maybe they should still learn that so they can. But then they have, when the time comes, they have the ability of the calculator. But I think there are a set of fundamental medical skills that if you start off with using these models at the level they're at, which is beyond what any calculator could do, that the metaphor breaks down. And if you never learn them to begin with, then you really do, I think, lose something, and we end up in a different place than we would want to be.
I think that is true.
That fair?
I think it's absolutely true. I like looking at all, because we had to define our student use policy and like what are we going to allow our trainees, and not just medical students, but residents, but fellows, and also continuing medical education, right? As even as attendings, we're all practicing as well. We looked at other schools' policies, and I like the principle is, well, you can use these tools once you've demonstrated you could have done it on your own. That's a great principle. It's just hard to enforce. There's debate. Would you allow an intern, an MS3, to use Ambient Scribe to write its note for them? It's like, well, how will they ever know how to write a plan if they've never, if AI always does it for them? I think that's quite a tension, and it does have an issue. I think ultimately we want everybody to be at the high. Let the AI remember everything. Who cares? Why do you want to do that? We'll have judgment. We'll do the patient interaction, but you can't have judgment about something if you've never learned the knowledge.
I also worry because obviously the models are trained on text that has been created by humans, and that came from science experiments, for example, that we hope present truth about the world. If all of our generated text ends up becoming AI generated, there's a circle.
This is the AI slop, Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail, and clearly already is happening. And I think a lot of the tech companies building the frontier models, you know, they would say it's not getting more data at this point, it's like trying to get higher quality text in there, which is why many newspapers are suing them. It's like, we know you're using our newspaper, and we know you like it because we produce high quality writing, right? I suspect what will happen is the text and the way we probably talk and write without even realizing it's going to be more and more homogenized, right? You can detect it now, right? When somebody writes you an AI generated email, you can kind of, the reality is how many times did you not notice, but sometimes you notice, and like, ugh.
Well, there's a whole Wikipedia page, I discovered it this week, that is dedicated to like tells from language models. And some of them, like you say, are obvious. There's the word delve, and there's the critical, and the word deep, and the M dashes.
And the M dash, the notorious.
I used to love M dashes. Now I
actively delete anyone I see.
I have to stop using them. I was the only one I knew that liked M dashes.
Is this AI or is this Dr. Ashley? I'm not sure anymore.
I know. It's so I feel personally sad about that, but it's it's a challenge, and with so many places where we're asked ourselves as professors or attendings to generate text. Sometimes our students help us, but and then if these are shortcuts, then we end up in a world where everything ends up being generated.
It is, and I think it's certainly going to homogenize our style of reading and writing because so much will be there. But I don't know if it's a good analogy. Maybe that abstracts us to the level where we can get more to the actual thinking and meaning in a way. This isn't the perfect analogy, but thinking about programming languages, this is why computer scientists love this, right? Yeah. Oh, who wants to write bytecode in the computer? That's crazy. Oh, we have assembly language, so it looks sort of like words. Oh, that's the pain. Let's get like a Pascal or Fortran, so it looks more like you're writing sort of sentences. Let's get C++, let's get Python. Now it's, let's just write in English and have AI generate the lower level code for me. That's a great abstraction, but I think when it comes to, it's treading on the domain of normal human interactions in a way that I don't think we've had to deal with before.
Yeah, I think that really is a bit different. You began your talk with one of my favorite quotes, which is, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So let's get back to the magic.
Sure,
because you are the only person that I think any of us know who provides lectures, talks, shows that include both really up to date, and you were showing data from yesterday around a very topical subject, which is AI. But also intersperses that quite literally with magic tricks, and you entertained us greatly. How did you went into magic when you were 12?
A little bit. I didn't really do that. But
you picked it back up again.
I picked it up again maybe 5-6 years ago, a little bit just before the pandemic.
Was this a pandemic thing?
It was kind of a pandemic thing. It was my oldest child at the time. He was probably 8 or 9. We went to just some street magic show, and somebody pulled a rabbit out of a box, and his face just lit up, and he squealed. I don't know if you see a child like really experience that wonder. It's a really it really is a magical thing. But the magic trick is not magical. It's seeing somebody have that experience. I'm like, oh wow, my kid enjoys a magic. I should show him a magic trick just like I had when I was a kid. I bought him a little basic kid set. Here's how you do it. Let me show you how you do it. And I was showing him and my other colleague a trick, and his young son. And as I was doing it, my colleague looks over. Jonathan should work on his sleight of hand. I was like, oh, What did you just say to me? How dare you?
I'm getting feedback on my magic.
Yes, I'm trying to entertain your child, and you're giving me this flack. So I will go learn some sleight of hand magic and do a little bit more with it. And it was a fun way to interact with students and look. I'm a nerdy professor, but I'm approachable too. And it just kind of spiraled out of control during the COVID pandemic. We're all locked indoors. We can't do anything. Some people learn how to bake sourdough bread. I literally spent 3 months learning how to do a very advanced Rubik's Cube magic trick. And I showed only a very little bit of that on stage today. And it's spiraled out of control. I've been in and won multiple competitions. I've been paid gigs just to perform magic.
You performed in Vegas, I do believe.
Oh, that's right. Yes, I have performed on the main stage in Vegas before. That was a novelty at the health conference recently, as Stanford made that connection. Not something I was trying to do, but it's unearthing some childhood aspirations and inner child, and also it helps me better about presentations. I think you learn a lot of empathy when you do magic, because it's all about, who cares what I'm doing? I have to anticipate, what are you thinking while I do this? Because I don't want you thinking the wrong thing. I want you to think of this thing, right? So you have to really understand what another person is saying and thinking, if I reach my hand here, it's going to make you do something. And directing this narrative, setting up expectations, I found that a very powerful combination. And it was a few years ago, the University Medical Partners, they invited me for keynote on AI and medicine. That was supposed to be. But they also had this theme about magic of medicine for that week. Like, I actually can perform some magic too. Can I do that as a bonus?
Right.
And I blame it on my wife. Actually, thank you to my wife, because she was one like, hey, why not? Why is that separate? You could like do them together. What if you had some magic in the middle of your talk? Like, that's crazy. Who would do that? That's ridiculous. They're gonna laugh me off the stage here. But I'm like, but if there's a thematic theme, and I think there is, that could be very fun and could be very compelling. And especially in that prior era with generative AI emerging, like, you can't tell what's real anymore. A Turing test, is that a real human, or is that just chatbot? No, that image looks so real. That video of me, that was all fake. That was all AI generated. And so I'm using magic again as that allegory. Boy, does that look real, but you still have to have that judgment to tell the difference.
It's a really powerful combination. And Jonathan, we're so happy to have you in our department.
I'm very happy to be here.
Proud of the work that you've done in an academic way, and really bringing us safely into this future, and of course in education in the next generation.
So glad to be here, and I, for better or worse, consider part of my mission as well as being a physician scientist. I'm so glad to be in Stanford Medicine, reaching all of our people, but also reaching beyond to everybody else that we can.
Thanks for joining us on The Future of Medicine.
Thank you, Dr. Ashley.
The preceding program is copyrighted by the Board of Trustees of the Leland Stanford Junior University. Please visit us at med.stanford.edu.